Hello, my name's Dan Rowe. I'm the Historic Resource Supervisor with the Berks County Parks and Recreation Department. Today we are on site at one of our more historic park properties, the Allegheny Aqueduct Historical Park. And for the next few moments, we're going to talk about one of our more significant historical resources here, the Allegheny Aqueduct, and its importance to the Schuylkill Canal back in the mid to late 1800s. So I'm standing alongside the canal prism of the old Schuylkill Canal, or also known as the Schuylkill Navigation System. And back in the 1800s, this would have been the physical location of one stretch of the Schuylkill Canal. The Schuylkill River sits just off to our right. And when the Schuylkill Canal was conceived and designed, it was first designed as a slack water navigation system. So what that meant is that the river, the Schuylkill River, was used as much as possible for the canal, and only in sections where the river was not navigable would a man-made canal be built. But here, again at the Aqueduct Historical Park, we do have evidence of that old canal. You can plainly see the canal prism here that does lead up to the aqueduct structure itself. Now, the aqueduct was mainly used as a bridge for boats, again part of that canal thoroughfare, and its use was to bypass or go over top of the Allegheny Creek. So again, we're along the canal prism. Now today when you take a look at this area, you obviously have this bold shape divot here in the ground, but back when this was in operation from the late 1820s and on, you would have found a more pronounced rectangular ditch here cut into the ground, usually about 8 to 10 feet deep. The canal would have had wooden planks on the bottom to help with the water, helping to keep the water inside. And if you can picture a barge, a canal boat, usually about 90 feet in length, and almost stretching from each side of the canal itself, that would be walking or floating down here through the canal toward the aqueduct. Now, on the other side of where I'm standing, you would have had the tow path. Most of these canal boats were pulled by mules, going only usually 3, 4, maybe 5 miles per hour. So a very slow going process with moving these heavy boats on the canal. During the canal heyday here in the United States, that was the typical process. So we're down below here at the bottom of the aqueduct, and we have one of our interpretive signs here at the park. And the sign features 3 photographs, and the first one that you're looking at gives you a view of the canal prism that you saw previously, and that photograph dates about the late 1940s to early 1950s, but it gives you a better idea of what that area would have looked like with the canal actually intact in that space. You can also see the tow path along the right-hand side of that. Now, although commercial traffic ended on the Schuylkill Canal around 1931 or so, much of the canal remained intact here in Berks County for a few years after that. So the canal did have a lot of prominence as a recreational space during that time period in the 40s and even a little bit into the early 1950s. The other photograph we have here on the far right, this is a period photograph from the late 1890s, early 1900s, and this shows the aqueduct in use as far as the canal function. What you can see in this photograph is one of the Schuylkill Navigation Company's workboats named the Dolphin crossing over the Allegheny Aqueduct in the photograph. And then our middle picture here gives you a great view of the aqueduct following its first restoration around 1990. What happened here in the early 1980s, there was a bit of a grassroots effort to commemorate and memorialize the aqueduct that was still standing. Eventually the county of Berks would acquire the property, and with some state funding, this was restored back around 1990. It was then added to the National Register of Historic Places at that time as well. I'm standing here now directly in front of the aqueduct, and this really gives you a great perspective on the structure itself. It was first built around 1824 using brown and sandstone that you can still see with the color here of the structure today, and it featured 5 arches that you can see running from side to side. Again, the main purpose here of the aqueduct was to carry the canal over top of the Allegheny Creek, which is just off to my left. Now, over the years, when it fell out of use at the end of the canal function in the 1930s, some of the structure did start to deteriorate. A lot of vegetation started growing through it. So a lot of that work in the late 1980s into around 1990 was to remove much of the vegetation that was here. Some stone had to be replaced. The main decking on the top of the aqueduct was also replaced at that time, and the canal prism was reestablished a little bit more at that time period as well. Now we are about 30 years since that last restoration, so again the structure is starting to show its age a little bit. So we do have some long-term plans here within the park system to do some restoration efforts on the aqueduct in the coming years. So we're back up top here on the aqueduct, and again we're standing right at the edge of where the aqueduct meets the canal prism or the old canal. And again, back in its use, there would have been 8 to 10 feet of water here with wooden decking in the canal proper, then leading on to essentially a concrete bridge. Now, over the years, the aqueduct, ever since it was first built in 1824, did have some leaking trouble. So the Schuylkill Navigation Company did do some repairs on that over the years. At one point they had decking on the bottom, but they were utilizing hydraulic cement throughout the late 1800s. You can also see some remnants of timbers that run along the length of the aqueduct as well. And they were basically used as bumpers. If the boat was going side to side, it would help protect the aqueduct structure itself from any of that damage. And again, directly behind me would be the location of the tow path, again, where those mules would be pulling the boats along the canal. And of course, once they got over the aqueduct, they'd continue on back into the man-made canal farther north. So we are at the other side here of the aqueduct, and again, standing up top, you have a good view of the aqueduct structure itself. And of course, to reiterate, this was bypassing the Allegheny Creek. So when the canal was designed and built, this section of the canal ran straight into the Allegheny Creek, and so the aqueduct would serve as that bridge for the canal boats to get across over top of the creek to the other side. So behind me you can see some vegetation that has grown up on the back side of this, but again, the canal prism actually continues on in that direction, still very visible today for about another mile or so. And of course, the Schuylkill Canal itself would then run all the way into more or less downtown Reading, where it would then follow the route of the Schuylkill River farther north. Now, the canal was about 108 miles total from Port Carbon in Schuylkill County all the way down to Philadelphia. In its heyday throughout the 1860s into the late 1880s, the primary material that was conveyed here on the canal was anthracite coal. And so again, by the 1890s or so, a lot of that commercial traffic started to fade away. But of course, again, we're here at the aqueduct. Route 724 sits right on the other side of us here. Old River Road sits down this way. So the aqueduct itself is still very accessible, very easy to see if you get a chance to stop by and check it out. Thank you so much for taking a quick tour with us today around the historic Allegheny Aqueduct. And again, if you're on Route 724, just outside of Birdsboro or Gibraltar, turn on to Old River Road that you see here behind me, and you can pull off and get a closer look at the historic Allegheny Aqueduct. If you're interested in more canal history or information, you can visit our C. Howard Heister Canal Museum, which is located at the Berks County Heritage Center, again, one of our parks here within the county park system. And for more information on all of our programming, upcoming events, and other historical features within the parks, you can check us out online at www.countyofberks.com/parks. Thanks again for taking a tour of the Allegheny Aqueduct.